Hi, I'm Mike Harrell, and today I'm going to do an interview with John Flaherty, who lives now in York, England. I first came across him in his YouTube channel and was impressed by several things. His ability to stay close to his heart, his message and understandings on how people get wounded, and a strong feeling that he may have some answers and a process to help you heal emotional wounds that lead to addicted, wounded lifestyle. John Flaherty is a teacher of spiritual and emotional well-being. For the last 25 years, John and his wife, Anne Louise, have been teaching a message of hope and empowerment to those who have felt often crushed and powerless. Vastly experienced, their work has taken them across the world. They have lived in England, Ireland, and Canada, and today they are providing online mentoring service to people in North and South America, Canada, Australia, India, China, and across Europe. After 6 years of studying theology, philosophy, scriptures, ethics, John went on to serve for 11 years as a Catholic priest. He then left the ministry and furthered his studies in theology and public media, gaining a Bachelor's of Arts honors degree from Leeds University in England in 1996. In the same year, John was appointed Client Service Manager in England for the care of those with HIV and AIDS. And then in 1997, John and Anne Louise were relocated to Ireland. In Dublin, John established the first inner-city drug and alcohol community-based counseling service for families of those in addiction and managed a multi-disciplinary team of professionals providing care, individual and group psychotherapy services. In 2002, he gained his master's degree in drug alcohol policy at Trinity Colleges, Dublin. He is a trained master NLP practitioner and a trainer of energy psychology. At the beginning of the new millennium, John and Anne Louise were established in their own private practice, integrating their skills, study, expertise, and professional experience to provide leading-edge psychotherapy services to families and individuals with addictions, dependencies, deep-seated emotional pain, and low self-image and self-worth, trauma, and abuse. Working with Cross-Border Peace Initiative in Ireland, they assisted people on both sides, the North and South, many of whom have become dependent on alcohol and prescription drugs or unprescribed drugs to numb their pain. Then in Canada, they assisted the Indigenous First Nations people, working with the survivors of the Indian Reservation School who suffered long-term addictions to alcohol and prescribed medications. In Vancouver, John and Anne Louise were providers of spiritual emotional mentoring to those attending Canada's only private naturopathic outpatient clinic for drug and alcohol detoxification. They provide one-on-one psychotherapy services and group facilitation to Canada's exclusive private residential treatment center for men with drug and alcohol dependency and problem gambling. They continue to mentor war veterans and those still serving in the Canadian Armed Forces presenting the symptoms of military post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, alcohol, and substance misuse. John is the author of Addiction Unplugged, How to Be Free. It is the first book of its kind to be written from the perspective of conscious awareness. It is now available on Amazon.com and translated into 5 languages: English, German, Spanish, Romanian, and Polish. Dr. Gabor Mate, MD, author of the best-selling book In the Realm of the Hungry Ghost, Close Encounters with addiction, wrote of John's book. In his life, work, and now in his succinct, elegant book, John Flaherty brings us home to who we really are, the pure self underneath our beliefs, emotions, behaviors, and addictions. In that authentic and powerful place, we find liberation. That's a pretty good review of his book. Well, this was I'm going to preface this video with an admission that this is a terrible interview. I did a terrible job of being interviewed, of interviewing. And which is sad, because an interview is supposed to be a gift to the person being interviewed. But what it is a fantastic demonstration of what John Flaherty does. He is so intuitive and so tuned in, and has done face-to-face, conversations with people who need help for so long that he just knows intuitively what to give people. So I have an agenda. I have my need. I need to say what I need to say. And if you watch this video, you can see that he was doing therapy on me the whole time, and he did a fantastic job of it. Yes, we talked about a lot of stuff, but really it was him helping me. And so when you watch the video and you can see how it looks like a lumpy, terrible interview, it is really a fantastic him helping me, him gifting me. And so it's humbling, but that is also a fantastic showcase of who he is and what he does. Much respect. I was totally played. I did not know it until I got into the edit, and I realized what was happening, and I had to talk to my son about it, like what was going on there, and that's what's going on. He was actually gifting me and helping me express myself. So here's the interview.
I think for a long time, Michael, myself, certainly in those years as a priest, and certainly all the training that led to that, I could always speak well and eloquently enough, but as long as I had notes somewhere, it was nicely polished, it was well prepared, it was delivered in a nice neat package, and as time went on, I realized that was not really ever, although it may have sounded okay, wasn't really going to make much of a difference in someone's life. It was so much more necessary for me to discard the notes and not even necessarily go into the particular preparation for it at all, but to literally just settle myself and be far more present and engage, really truly engage with the other person. And then, like you're saying, then the sorcery, the magic could begin, of course, because it was more true, it was more aligned. But it did take me, considerably longer than my years in the priesthood to actually discover that, to give myself the permission and the freedom to relax enough in that knowledge and in that truth. Yeah.
Well, I watched one of your videos, actually two of your videos last night, just to kind of refresh and keep up to speed with who you are and what you're saying. And it's astounding that that you use all the same words, the same emphasis, and for the same reasons
Yes.
that I do.
Yeah.
That is, you talk about judgments and beliefs, and you talk about the framing of your self-image, whether you're this or whether you're that or that.
Yeah.
And that's really, and then I thought, and when I first heard your videos, I thought, this guy is onto something, and he's congruent with what I do, with what I teach.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to get out there. You need to get out there more. So there's like a selfish reason why I'm doing this, because I want to align myself with people who have the right message, so that it's not just me who's like a carpenter person who came up with this idea. There's other people out there who have the same idea. There's general themes of how you got wounded, and there's
Yeah.
a general themes and process of how you get unwounded. And there's a lot of kind of variations, but it's basically the same themes.
It is indeed, yeah. And you know, my own kind of description for that is how we discover how to literally give ourself back to ourself with a capital S. You know, the truth, far more the truth of who we are rather than who we've learned to become. Yeah, yeah.
Well, you had this. Actually, I'm just to give you a heads up. It's kind of nice to have like a little chat beforehand, but we're like right there. So we're recording now. So you have this thing about identity, and I am. That's my antenna goes up. Identity, because identity in some ways is the antithetical force. It is what is created as yourself in absentia. Right? So we have ourself that's kind of floating around, and we create this identity, which are our habits and our beliefs, as you say, and judgments.
Mm-hmm.
And he uses this thing of I am, and you talk about I am as the authentic self. But in identity, when you say I am, that is, so I am is like this, the being, the me, the separate being. But in reality, if you feel your way through it, when you say I am, through identity, it's a definition of what you're not.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
So it's like, I am in this family, I have this religion, I have this name, I have this society, right? But I'm not a tree, I'm not the universe, I'm not the stars, I'm not the air, I'm not the earth. And all of a sudden the list of what you're not is huge.
Yeah.
You're not the politician, you're not your neighbor. And it's like the whole list of what you're not becomes intimidating. And so then you have to protect what you are. So I am my intellect and what I've learned. I am my history. I am my memories. I am my family's traditions. And those beliefs become something, because identity is sort of in a state of panic and has to like prop up its littleness and make its littleness.
Yes, it's always reacting.
Always reacting. Yeah.
Yeah, very totally reactive. Never just proactive, and certainly not just active, but always on guard, in fear, of course, really.
In fear. So anytime you threaten somebody's belief, because it is you in absentia, and it's not real, so not authentic, it's not true, that identity, it has to defend itself. So every time you have a belief, there's an attack or a defense.
Yes.
No, I am a smart person. I have a degree. See, that's a defense. Or I know more than you because I have a degree. See, that's an attack, because you have to protect the identity, because the identity is so small and fragile. It is not the whole universe or the earth or the air or the sky or the nature, and
Absolutely. There's the belief, the absolutely often hidden from us, but absolutely entrenched belief that we have to vie and compete for energy, for enough attention to come our way, in order to give the ego its verification. And so, of course, totally unnecessary. But until you become aware of that, that's just an immediate reaction. We're constantly caught up in just that and only that. It's all that exists. It's the only way that you think you are operating and living. And of course, by its very nature, it creates a reality that's as if you're on a constant battlefield, always competing. And of course, there lies.
And always defending. So there's always the shame of being separate, the shame of being small. So then you have to pump up your ego to be bigger and aggrandized, or to be shy, or whatever it is. It is in relationship to that first identity of separation from everything.
Sure, Michael. And although we often think of the ego as being that inflated persona, the ego can also, of course, do its exact opposite and keep us incredibly small too, almost invisible, so that we're not present, we're not as easily susceptible or vulnerable to those very same fears and threats as well. So yeah, it's a peculiar.
Actually, you're absolutely right. There is a higher function of ego, and a lot of people, and so ego gets bashed, but ego gets bashed by identity. Because they're interesting. So identity is going over here in the subconscious, making all kind of a mess, and then when your life is a mess, it's saying, well, that's your ego did it. But really,
yeah,
the right use of the high use of ego is when you watch a movie, right? And it's like let's say it's a murder mystery, a whodunit, you know? Is it the maid, or is it the butler, you know, or is it the girlfriend, or is it that strange person that just came in at the night? So the ego keeps track of the plot and is able to pick out the good guys from the bad guys, see? And then to say, oh, well, really, it was the maid that did it, see? And they can figure all that stuff out. Now, when you apply that to your internal drama, then you can see the plot. Well, I had this thought, and this thought it was created over here, and then this thought became an action that really hurt me, and it's done it over and over again. So that's the right use. That's the right use of the best use of ego, and you can see what the plot is, who the bad guys are, and what the results are. And in that regard, ego becomes like a savior. It becomes the super sleuth, the detective, the healer.
Oh yeah, I mean, as I've often noticed you pointing out, the new age kind of approach would be to really bash the ego. But you know, we're going to have a thing called ego for as long as we have a human form. It just comes courtesy of, you know, our being human, the thing called ego. So we have an ego. We're not the ego. We're not the ego alone. That, you know, we have, and then, as you were saying earlier, you know, there's so much more to our being than what the ego can or can't manage.
Well, so in my frame, the way I look at it is the first addiction is the addiction to identity. And what I call identity is kind of actually kind of classic. There's the Carl Jung talks about the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is all your thoughts and all your memories, but he talks about them as people. The collective unconscious is people, so you are peopled in your unconscious. Now, in that, and that is like the advisors to your identity. But in that group, there's this group that's called intentionality. And intentionality are the beings, which are programs, they're movies. And anything that ever happens to you is a result of that intentionality. And intentionality is not intentions, it is the power to intend. So I'll give an example of that. Let's say there was a woman who's at the checkout counter at the store, yeah, and she's a little overweight, she has a couple of kids, but her intentions were to be a dancer. She wants to be a classic dancer or you know, a jazz dancer or something like that. That's her intentions. But here she is at the checkout counter. The reason why she's at the checkout counter at that job, a little bit overweight with a couple of kids, her intentions have nothing to do with her intentionality. Her intentionality was in a completely directed. The results of her life was the result of the intentionality, which is in her subconscious as these, you know, the mom, the dad, the judge, or the whatever the dream was. So, and it is our addiction to being asleep at the wheel and letting the habits of identity run our life. And so all addiction to me stems from that, because that is what controls the results.
Mm-hmm.
If the image in the head is saying, I might as well give up. This is too much. I might as well give up and be high. That is the intentionality that creates the addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just do it without ever examining. Of course, this all goes on a little bit below the level of consciousness. So that's why you need a therapist or maybe somebody else to interfere, because somebody else can see it, because you can't, because it's happening below your level of consciousness.
Well, sometimes that is the case, Michael. I would agree. Sometimes, and yet not always, because sometimes, of course, the counselor or the therapist is unfortunately forgetting to remember, what they are truly all about, and it's very easy for the counselor or therapist to still keep the whole interaction between client and counselor as if it were on a battlefield also. The thinking that we still have to overcome so many things, that there are all of these problems in life that we have to win over or fight, and we use all the terminology, especially in that whole field of addiction. It's absolutely crammed, packed with these peculiar notions of how we have to fight the demon within, or slay the dragon on your shoulder, or the whatever, the monkey on your back, all of that kind of terminology. Even if this is the therapist who entertains that with the client, we over sensationalize the problem, and again, it's clouding all the time our reality, the truth behind all of that made up creation.
It's simple.
It's all marvelous truths are incredibly simple.
It's just very, very simple. Look, becoming wounded, becoming addicted, damaged, whatever the label is, you want to know how easy it is? Little children do it.
Of course they do.
That's how easy it is. Little children do it naturally. And as a matter of fact, that is one of the steps to becoming wounded is that it's automatic. It's automatic. Mm-hmm. And if you understand how a person gets wounded, you can just reverse it around, and you have to do the opposite of automatic and be deliberate, make an effort.
Literally turning the whole thing around.
Yeah, you have to make an effort. You can't just automatically do it. Although it is like learning to ride a bicycle. You have to make a deliberate effort to learn how to ride the bicycle, but after that it becomes automatic. And healing is the same way, is that you actually train your subconscious to see the patterns, to feel into what the result of this thought or this behavior is going to do. And when you train your body and your emotional body and your heart to recognize that, you can literally take over and become a subconscious healing program. That's kind of a nice goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we can do for ourselves, by ourselves, to ourselves. It's a very much an individual process, if you like, sometimes called a journey, but a journey that doesn't have to be ongoing and forever and for always. There must be a point at some time where we have enough conscious awareness that makes decisions less arduous to make for ourselves and about ourselves, and life more in alignment with how we would wish to have it. As long as if we keep taking judgment out of it, and judgment of ourselves, which has been so ingrained in society and in humanity, then of course that battlefield type scenario no longer needs to be our experience at all.
Yeah, it's kind of like a path of perpetual acceptance. You have to accept what is and accept, because you can't fight the demons in a way. You have to accept them and then escort them out politely, Well,
maybe so. Or get to the point, which ideally is what I would certainly be inviting people to do, to come to a point in a person's awareness where there is necessarily not a demon to be got rid of or to even be escorted out. If we have been introduced as so many of us have been, to the fact that there are adversaries, then they have to be accommodated. They become part of our reality. If indeed we come to a place of realization where there aren't necessarily anything that we're up against or having to face as something that could possibly threaten us, then it simply does not exist. We can literally simply let it slip out from our reality. We've just got very, very conditioned, have we not, to accommodating so many possibilities, and that's one of them, that there is a thing called a demon to be got rid of or to be displaced, that we can spend all of our energy doing just that. That in addiction, that the whole term of being in this perpetual time of recovery is usually exactly that, But we can reach a point also and realize maybe we've done enough of that, and now would it not be the next necessary experience for us to be having, where we simply are in alignment with life itself, where there are people who will enter our life who will be very different from us, have entirely different approaches to us, but which we don't necessarily have to find space and room for in our life, to the extent that it will deplete us in the way it once did.
I have a very mundane, really mundane, boring framing of being wounded. First of all, I start off with telling everybody that there's nothing wrong with you. Nothing wrong with you. But now you have to fix what's wrong with you. And that's like a paradox, but it's not really a paradox, because if you have a house and it's a beautiful, fantastic house, but it got cluttered up with all kind of dirt and, you never took out the trash, the whole inside of the house may be full of trash, but there's nothing wrong with the house. All you have to do is take out the trash. So it's not like that there's something wrong. You're not broken. You're not damaged. You're not ill. You just have a room full of trash. Or you could use another analogy of, if you have a car and then maybe one of your tires on the car goes flat, and then it's impossible to drive the car. You can still move it, but it's just this horrible experience of, but there's nothing wrong with the car. You fix the flat, and the car is, guess what? It's back to absolutely normal. And within a day or two of driving the car normally, you have completely forgotten that you ever had a flat, because the car is in factory specs, is doing what it's supposed to do. And that's how I start. Is that there is nothing wrong. It is impossible for anything to be actually wrong with you. So it's just a matter of fixing what's wrong with you, which is not you. Because what's wrong with you is not you.
Or terminology I would tend to use would be literally just slipping out from that otherwise erroneous belief that there could be something wrong with you. That's it. Just literally extricate yourself from such a belief that clearly has been inherited from someone or someplace else.
Well, there was a survey, I think it was this guy named Greg Braden. He talked about it in the 1990s. He talked about that there was a survey done on American children and how many times they were told no by the 18th year. And it was 56,000 times. And so that is all different kind of variations of no, And I was thinking about that, and that, to me, that what does that do? So you have this identity, you're beginning to form this identity, and it's like, no, honey, don't cry. No, honey, stop. That's 6, 7 no's right there. And then you do that day after day, so that every time you move, there's a little bit of a no there. And then that goes into this identity, and the identity is pretty much telling you no all the time. So then you have powerful, strong, painful no's, and no's that sound like love.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. They're often
the mom loves you, but she's telling you, don't make noise or else I'm going to kill myself, or whatever. So that is the beginning of the formation of an identity. So then you have to change your identity. I'm not acceptable the way I am because I'm getting all the, there's nothing that I can do that it won't get a no. Yeah. And it becomes and it's the people that you love and the people that at one point appear to be God, and it's being judged. So there's the judgment of your mother, and then there's also the judgment of God, because who judges is the judge in court with the gavel. Your friends judge you and God judges. So there's this whole cultural, family, society, legally, spiritual judgment.
Yeah.
And then judgment, whenever you have that judgment, it demands a sacrifice. When the judge smacks down the hammer, he goes, guilty, right? And now, so what we most people live in guilty and shame because they're not good enough, and they're not smart enough, they're not beautiful enough, they're not rich enough, all that stuff. But there's guilty, right?
Yeah.
And as soon as the judge says guilty, guilt demands a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right. So the sacrifice is your joy, your happiness. You can't go a certain way. You can't look a certain way. You can't relate to certain people. You know, you have to. You see, so it's things get taken away. Like the ground that you could exist in as yourself gets narrowed and narrowed and narrowed. So all these things right here, based on those 56,000 no's, which are cultural. Not every culture does this. I mean, don't know if, I'm sure England has the same kind of a problem, but I'm sure other countries are different. You know, the American Indians are different and so on. Mm-hmm. But that's how it starts. It starts with that. And then those no's and the implications, the little movies of the no's, form our collective subconscious. And in them is the intentionality, which means everything you do has to go through this board of directors.
Yes. And you know, in a sense, just kind of keeping it within the framework of what most of my work is about, in the sense of under this label of addiction, you can say, of course, that as a result of what you've just been saying, that we are all addicted. We are all, to some extent, under the illusion of that which we're not. We've all been contaminated to an extent and diminished, and it's a question after that of reclaiming all the time, just reclaiming, pulling back, drawing back our essence and letting go of those falsehoods that are well and truly written into humanity. Okay, they're well and truly written into the fabric of what makes America, Great Britain, wherever. All those cultural things, but they're all absolutely pitted with, just like you've been saying, guilt that you could possibly get life right or that you could possibly get life wrong, and as a result, you know, we become addicted to trying to self-soothe that falsehood. We do it in a great variety of ways. We're very ingenious beings. Some will go to extraordinary lengths in their self-harming methods to do that, and others, it can be, you know, result from an absolutely innocuous off-the-cuff remark made by a parent or a teacher at an early age that keeps that person stunted, less than, and always in pain because of the falsehood that they're trying still to live out.
Always in pain. I'd like to underscore that one, because all this stuff hurts.
Of course
it hurts.
It does.
To be diminished, to be told no, to be shamed, to be blamed. Yeah. On the subconscious level, there's that base note of pain that by our survival we have to deny. So there's a denial involved in maintaining ourselves, and the denial is of the pain in various frequencies.
Yeah. So there would be all the underlying things that we can get at. I know we're just chatting away, and we can go with it any way you want, Michael. But basically, you know, there's some of the things that we can continue just chatting about in this interview, as such, in this conversation that we're sharing together. Anyway,
I'm doing a terrible job of interviewing you. I should be asking you these great questions, like
No, however you want to do it. I mean, I did say let's just play it by ear, and I'm very open to whatever, either you want to put to me or share with me, and then we can continue like we're doing now, just chatting and opening up things.
Well, you have something that really fascinates me, is I think you have some solutions. You have some solutions. And
right.
part of it is you already talked about reframing, and like one of my mottos. My motto is, belief is a power, but not believing is a superpower. So to be able to not believe is a good trick to have in your pocket. So you have, I think, a collection of processes and understandings that move a person away from that stuck, I am only this way, into in a more healed way.
Possibly so. I can honestly say that I don't have any one hard and fast method that I would, sit with any one individual and immediately go and apply. I've had to discover over the years that it's so important for me to really tune into the individual and to see what it is perhaps that they're really looking for, and what I may be aware of that could be that missing link that they're searching to discover. But for the person who's maybe tuning in, whether it's on the internet or on your own particular Facebook page, then let's just see what happens. And I'm sure if there's something you or I have to contribute that's going to be a help to that listener, to that viewer, then they'll recognize it.
Well, I mentioned the word reframing a couple of times. I have this friend on Facebook book that he was talking about how he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and depression, and that he was like on all these drugs, and he wasn't really happy with his therapist. And there was like a whole lot of comments. He was kind of like moaning, and he didn't know whether he should try to get off the drugs or whatever. And so he's got a lot of good advice. And I said to him, well, it sounds to me from your symptoms like you're having a shamanic experience. You're having a shamanic awakening, and you're learning things from another level that other people aren't. So if you're hearing voices in your head or having visions or something, it could be a very shamanic thing. Absolutely. He took that and ran with it. He got off the drugs, started dressing nice, started having a relationship with people, and his whole image of himself completely changed in one conversation, because it took that. He had the doctors, several. This is like he was on 7 different drugs from 2 different doctors. So it's like 3 from this one that weren't working. And he went to another doctor and got some more, 4 other ones and they weren't working. So he quit doing all that stuff, and then he started putting the hat on of that he's a shaman, and then he's learning the shaman stuff, and it's completely now has a way to fit his anomalous behavior, and
it's a
and
great,
off he goes.
Yeah, an example that I would come across in my own line many times over, Michael, exactly what you've described there. Because when an individual is exploring deliberately in order to, and maybe that exploration has in some cases meant they have excess with alcohol, or more so perhaps excess with various other substances. It has been, and certainly in my observation, it is the individual's desire not only to release pain and restriction and limitation about their life, but to actually genuinely attempt to discover more about who they really are. A desperate and a very earnest search to discover more about their very self. Now, what you've described there is literally you're giving that person permission to do so. Just permission, the okay, the green light to go ahead and yes, explore, and to give themselves a new definition of their very own self, a one that actually feels right, sounds right, looks right, and a one that they can naturally, immediately go in and adopt simply because they are creative beings who needed to explore, who had to go through a certain amount of pain to discover how to come out the other end of it and be far more honest, far more transparent, and far more fully alive. So for that person who discovered shamanism was actually far more in keeping with their natural expression of themselves. How wonderful that is. Did they have to go through the whole course of action to get there? Well, actually, maybe so. That's not, in which case they discovered first and foremost, like we were speaking about earlier, who they were not, in order to then better discover, wow, this is certainly more who I truly am. And yeah, it's a beautiful story, a great example. And that, I'm sure, is all I've been doing for many years. Offering the permission slip to an individual to go and redefine their very own being in a way that actually feels more possible to live with a free heart and with a free mind.
Another thing I'm kind of an exponent on is that we have this tyranny of identity that says you're only one thing, when actually we're polyphrenic. We're not just one being, one identity. We are the father, the uncle. We are the explorer. We can be the hero. We can be the goat. We can be the suffering. Or we can be the savior. And it's like, if it's nice to have that. Well, I can be the savior of humanity, or I can be the savior of myself, or I can be, you see what I'm saying? But to be stuck in, I am only the victim, or I am only an addict, or I am only a therapist. You see? What?
No, just we can so very easily keep ourselves so very limited, so very small. And I saw just a perfect example of that. My niece has recently, just in the last 2 weeks, given birth to a new baby girl, and the lovely little baby girl now, who has already brought a completely different presence and energy into the family and into the home and into life itself. The people looking down at the baby and already deciding for this newborn, how it's going to be, what life is going to be for it, even in their, like we talked about before, best intentions. They're already got lots of overlays. You're going to be a wonderful musician, just like your, father, or just like your mother, or you're going to, all of these things. In all likelihood, this little baby, as she grows older, might never like music. It may never be necessary for her to like music. And it doesn't really need to have that imposition placed immediately. But what she is already is new life. And we miss the newness so very easily for the desire to go and fill the space with our expectation of another. And there lies judgment, and there lies problem, and there lies the start of, in many cases, lots of deep pain, lots of hurt, and lots of misery as we try to unravel those expectations as we go along. That's where addiction really sits, right at the heart of that misconception about how we're supposed to be in life.
Yeah, and also not just addiction, but depression and suicide. Depression is a very, in some ways, it's more heinous than addiction. And addiction is on one level a level of honesty, where you say, I'm in pain and I'm going to take care of my pain this way because I'm screwed. And there's a level of honesty there, and if you can hook into their level of honesty, you can work with that. But when somebody is addicted, when somebody is depressed, that is where all their enthusiasm, their life force, their life care, everything is leaving them. It's amazing to actually, so any suggestion you give to them, there it is, this is leaving. And so, this and that, whatever suggestion you give to them, their core being is rejecting everything. And it's just this depressed thing. It's a really powerful thing. But when that meter goes to life's not worth living, or this, it's just like, it's a giving up of everything.
It's total resignation, isn't it?
Yeah.
To accepting the untruth that has been unfortunately expressed, repeated, re-repeated, imprinted, and persisted with, usually by another person, place, or thing, over and over and over, until our magnitude becomes tiny, tiny, or appears to be. And self-destruct is right at the core of that. Depression is absolutely deep resignation that maybe they're right,
or it's just not. It's like that you can't even pull up any energy, because the depression is actually very, very easy to get out of. You just have to find anything to love about yourself and just work on that, and all of a sudden the whole thing resets itself. But if you can't even find one speck or spark of self-love or self-care, then you have to do it yourself. Somebody can say, you're loving, you're lovable, and that's just leaving you. Say, you're loving, you're worthwhile, everybody loves you, you're such a wonderful person. They're not hearing that. See, I'm not allowed even a speck of love. I'm not allowed any life, any joy in life. It's just devastating.
Yeah.
That's a suicide.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. And, again, there have been many instances where I had privilege enough to have been able to work very, very closely with people. Maybe it has started with years of addiction, and again, wanting to self-soothe that deep hurt, that confusion, and that feeling of non-deserving and neediness that's never ever been fulfilled and never feels that it can be satiated sufficient. It does, of course, lead to that deep depression, and in many cases I've known meant that a person has literally felt they've had to leave this reality completely in that way. And it's understandable that a person would take that route out when things have become just too unbearable to continue in their life. But we really do have to become awake and conscious very quickly and address these matters in a very, very different way to the way that society has been. Again, in the addiction field particularly, or indeed in that whole area of what's sometimes described as mental health, where depression might also be attempted to be understood or assisted, it still tends to be, and certainly in addiction anyway, a rather punishing a system that we have in place. So one that still says, if you persist in doing A, B, and C, you will get X, Y, and Z. And the person who is actually there in charge of that whole regime can appear to be the one who has got life sussed, as opposed to the person who is struggling and appears to be the failure. As long as there is that presented in our systems, we haven't become consciously aware beings at all. We really are missing many, many, many opportunities here. And that's what, my wake-up call is constantly crying out to the systems in place and to the individuals involved in addiction, in depression, in suppression, in repression, all of those ION endings that actually really mean they've come to a standstill in life, that there must be more to you than this. There is so much more to you than this, but the individuals are simply not hearing that insufficiency from the people and the places and the systems that we currently have in place. They tend to be punishing rather than have the necessary compassion to really understand.
And they believe in believing. They believe that if what the doctors say, they believe what their parents say, they believe what their mind says. And that's a very dangerous thing. I also read a long time ago about this story about this man. I don't remember who it was, but because this was 40 years ago, I guess. And he was going to become a doctor of a psychoanalyst, which is a doctor, right? And so to become a doctor, you have to spend a certain amount of time in a hospital, even though he's going to be a psychotherapist, psychoanalyst.
Yeah.
So he's at this mental institution, and all he's doing is taking notes and things. And he was taking notes, and all he could do was just review their notes, and he would interview them and then send them on their way, because there's a whole, hospital was for crazy people. What he did was the people would come in and they would tell him his problems, and he would just say to them, don't believe that. Don't believe what you're saying in your head. And he did that with every person for months. Don't believe that. And the people who left did not believe the thoughts in their own head. The people who stayed were the ones who believed the thoughts in their head. So if you're saying, you're crazy, I'm nuts, or I'm no good, if you believe that, then you become insane. So there is a direct relationship to sanity and how much you do not believe in your own thoughts. If you do not believe in your own thoughts, it actually makes you more sane than the more you believe in your own thoughts, the more insane or more ill you are. I think that's an interesting little base note.
Well, it is. It absolutely is, Michael, because, when we've been talking, largely speaking, about how we're affected, how we're imprinted by the thoughts, actions, beliefs, and, therefore subject to whatever. Yeah. And of course, wherever that violator leaves off, our own self-talk, the internal chatter, the mind chatter that you're expressing, it just takes up from wherever they left off, So even when we have been violated, maybe by parents and maybe by teachers and maybe by whoever in the past, although they may no longer be on the scene, that internal self-talk literally continues the belief, continues the thought, continues the onslaught, even in their absence. And that is usually the most destructive thing. So much so that the belief, becomes our own perpetrator. Yeah, definitely.
And that what you call imprinting, I'm very much conscious of that imprinting, because there's this really famous guy on the internet who talks about the space of now, and he goes like this: there's nothing in the space. Right now, there's nothing. There's no strings. There's nothing attached in you. No chains. Nobody's pointing a gun at your head. Right now, there's nothing. Right. But what is in the nothing? What enters into the nothing is an impulse.
Yeah.
It's a psychic impulse. Because all the stuff that we're talking about is actually 100% psychic phenomena. It is like, woo-woo. Because it is not living, it is a psychic impulse. And I use this example like this. I move my hand like that, right?
Yeah.
And how is it that I can move my hand like that? I have this image in my head. I give a psychic impulse to my being to do that, right? Now, there's maybe 50 or 60 billion cells in my arm, in my shoulder, in my neck, and it's moving like that, instantaneously. So it is not a nerve that goes down from my head. There's a psychic impulse, and everybody already knows the game, right? Because I've moved my hand so much that it is in my sort of root memory to do this. When we have self-talk, we have self-sabotage, self-judgment, self-denial. When we have these things, they are exactly the same. They're an impulse of a habit, of an experience, the impression. There was an impression that becomes an impulse. And as soon as that impulse hits you, you have an emotional reaction, a physiological reaction, your endocrine system starts popping off, and you actually feel that exact impulse of the original imprint. Absolutely. So it's psychic. It's actually there's actually a psychic attack going on from memories of the past that became part of your biofield, your operating system. Just like we have to walk, there's a whole thing, the balance, the walk, and the muscles and all that stuff. It all happens subconsciously, automatically. And our destructive or debilitating or self-sabotaging programs are exactly the same way. And if you can catch that, you can dismantle them. You can dismantle them, but you have to catch them first, because nobody thinks that it's a psychic impulse that makes your hand do that. You don't think that way. But if you understand that it's a psychic impulse that happens, that everything you do is an impulse, and the impulse comes from your heart first and then your head.
It does, and it's always that way around. And again, just when we were talking a little earlier, Michael, it's usually the systems that we have in place to us, we think to assist another person, that are always quite the other way around. That it's far too much head related and rarely allows much for heart. Certainly, the whole of my training for the priesthood was very much head rather than heart. All the years of my earlier schooling for that was all about, John, don't let your emotions just run away with you. This is, something you have to learn that's factual. This is something that is academic. This is something that is logic. That was always the greater emphasis that was laid on myself. I have literally, as many more people are discovering how to do, are having to listen far, far more carefully to their heart, which of course holds huge amounts of data, huge amounts of information. But we have to literally discover for ourselves, because it's not something generally we're being taught, and certainly no one in my lifetime taught me this, and religions just certainly don't teach this, and education systems don't teach it, but we have to discover nonetheless, or remind ourselves, which is probably more true, how to do this, how to really listen to the heart, and then give the head what the heart literally has already discovered for us. Yeah, it's a completely different way around to it. And that, of course, is far more living our truth, far more living in tune with life itself.
Well, there's a couple of things that, the whole goal of the whole thing is to be more in the heart. All this stuff we're talking about of and that, all that stuff really is to allow the heart to come to front. So if you have emotional upset, that's down your belly, it has to pass through the heart. If you have bad thinking, it has to pass through the heart. So that get back to the heart is definitely the goal. But unfortunately, you have to work through the emotional side and through the negative self-talk, beliefs and judgments, and clear that out.
The first thing I think to simply do is to recognize that those things are there, that, like you were saying, that they have been imprinted, but that they're not the all of life. Now, our heart does hold energy that is far more ready to show us what the all of life is. So it's about putting it into an entirely different context. All of those behaviors we've been speaking about, whether they're depression or addiction or repression or suppression or anything of that kind, they are illogical. They're totally illogical behaviors. They don't make sense. If they did, well, people wouldn't be doing them. But they're illogical. And therefore, we might as well forget trying to make logical sense of something that's totally illogical as a behavior. And yet our systems only attempt to do that. They attempt to do it through the various therapies. They attempted to do it even through one that's often well respected and certainly well used nowadays, called cognitive behavior therapy. But it's still far too much emphasis on the cognitive, on the logical. We've really got to go beyond that. And our heart will show us the way to that, because it holds data, it holds energy, but it doesn't have the judgment, the logical judgment that presents the problems as the mind does have. And so when we listen carefully, when we really tune in to the heart, we have so much information at our disposal that the head could never come up with in a million years, because the head is so full of collected judgments.
Well, mostly what we think of as our head is like I said, this identity, which is not us. We have this other thing that's going on.
This other thing that's going on, yeah, which persists and insists that we do take full notice of that and only of it. And of course, that's where our confusion is, and a terrific agitation it is to the rest of our body.
Well, this whole thing is in one way is like a natural awakening and actually a natural growth. There's this image that I have of every dog in the world that's owned by humans was at one time in the ancient past a wolf. You can take a wolf pup and raise it by humans, and he might act a little strange, but basically he'll act like a dog. Might be a little bit aggressive dog, but it still acts like a dog. And the reason why you can tame a wolf pup is because you treat the wolf pup like a puppy for its whole life, and it never becomes an adult. Whereas out in the wild, there's the puppy, and then the puppy grows into an adult, and then it's the hunter. It takes care of all of its people, of all of its pack, and it goes and does the things, and there's a hierarchy. There's a whole thing that goes on when an adult wolf, when the wolves become adult. And so in one way, because we have this programming, we are like children. So we learn from our parents, and we have the other person, some higher authority is always, we have to listen to a higher authority, whether it be God or the government or whoever, or the guru or somebody like that. So we're always in this kind of like infantile kind of thing of like, make it better, mommy, or can I have this, daddy? And it's kind of like we're never taking responsibility. You never adult yourself. You never become an adult that is in charge of what's going on inside of you, what is in charge of whether you're in the heart or not, or whether you're letting anything hurt you or hurt your family.
Yeah,
So,
I get you completely. Do you know, as you know, my background, simply because that's how I was introduced to it, and then became a whole vocational career of mine as a Catholic priest. But, obviously, first and foremost, I was introduced to the Catholic religion, which I had no reason for long enough to ever question, think differently about, just to simply behave, because it was the imprinted reality that this is how to live, and this is how to create value in your life, and this is how to understand God in your life. But, and I came across a little quote of George Orwell, who said, one cannot really be a Catholic and grown up. Now, at one time I would have seen a statement like that and been so defensive of that which I'd been introduced to, the Catholic faith, I would have thought, that, what an awful statement that is. What could that possibly mean? I've had to relook at many, many aspects about my own life, my own programming, my own imprints, before I could possibly have the audacity to sit opposite another person in their distress and think that I could be of any assist to them. I've had to empty out all my own loyalties, my own imprints, my own beliefs, my own learned thoughts and judgments in order to do that. And I really do understand what Orwell was getting at there, meaning that not only can you not be just Catholic and be grown up, you couldn't be Hindu and grown up. You couldn't be, there's many, many things you cannot be and grown up if you think that the one thing that you were introduced to in the first place is the be all and end all of it. And that is there's such truth in that. To be really grown up, in other words, to be really matured in life, to be consciously aware, to be able to see life in its greater expansiveness, in its macrocosm, rather than just in its microcosm. We really do have to go beyond, no matter how wonderful it is, whatever it is that we've been introduced to, because that's only a snapshot of reality. Of the greater reality that is life itself. So all the time we need to be expanding and being able to let go of some things that no longer fit the expansion that we've newly moved into in our lives. I'm sure that's the answer to what will make our heart sing, will make the mind lessen its intolerant behavior, and will enable us to really grow and to have the freedom that each of us truly desires.
I agree. I think there's some scripture about that. It's something about, when you become a grown up, you have to put away childish things.
Yeah, we really do.
including, I think that means your childish beliefs and your toys and your way of doing things, and your dependence, and your giving your sovereignty away. Most people are not very sovereign. They do not.
No, no,
They do
that's right.
not. They're not a good king of their own inner kingdom.
Yeah,
They
and yeah,
they've given their kingship away to the advisor. The advisor is.
absolutely. Whomever that advisor may be, yeah, for
Yeah.
good, bad, or indifferent. And it's so important, I believe, for us to stop being so disempowered. And that is the victim consciousness or the victim mentality that I'm always so keen to at least invite, because life's inviting us to do this all of the time, to invite ourselves to expand, so that your life becomes an expansion, a constant expansion. And that same expansion becomes the message that you speak. It's the only message now that I think is worth coming from my lips, one of encouragement, of expansion, because that's what all of life is about. That's what all nature is about. It's about wiggly lines, as Alan Watts, the great philosopher and spiritual teacher, describes it, rather than attempting to keep it on these terrible straight lines. Life doesn't run on straight lines. It runs on wiggly lines.
It's
It has
messy.
wonderful variations and beauties about it, because it's a creation, a constant creation. And we cannot not create. We are by nature creators. And so we've got to also have that wiggly line approach, which therefore requires no judgment of another, and certainly no judgment of ourselves. We've really got to abandon anything at all that could be keeping ourselves so small and diminished and fear-filled.
Well, I'm glad you talked about that, because it's like the abandonment or the releasing. Because the way I look at it is part of being the adulting. What I call the adulting, doing the adult stuff, being the
Yes.
parent to your inner child, or being the caretaker of yourself. We breathe in air and breathe out carbon dioxide. So in with the good, out with the bad. We drink water, liquids, and then that goes, our body sustains that and transmutes that, and we eliminate that. We eat food, and this magic thing happens. We get energy, we get full, and we feel good, but then we eliminate that. So there is a taking in and an elimination.
Yes.
But what we haven't done is we haven't learned how to eliminate the negative, the bad, the self-sabotaging thoughts and beliefs that we've taken them in, and now they get kind of stinky. They've kind of putrefied in there, and they have an effect on us. So if we never moved our bowels or moved our bladder, we would have a very miserable life. And in much the same way, if you do not clear the thoughts, the beliefs, the judgments, and the denials out of yourself, then you'll have that toxic result. You'll have a toxic internal atmosphere. It won't be love and cooperation. It won't be a nice kingdom with unicorns in it. It's going to be, the way you see it outside in the world. So there's this elimination process. And to me, that's what you do as an adult. You have to look at the stuff that's not working and find a way to eliminate that. And it's natural. You don't have to fight it. You just have to say, this is not working. I don't need that anymore. It's the whole process of doing that. Do that, and your life changed radically.
It does, and it does change radically. My own has changed radically as a result of really allowing much of what you've just spoken to actually become my own reality. And it has been, as I keep saying, a privilege to see so many other people who I have had opportunity to share those very same truths with, seeing the very same happening in their own life. It's often forgiveness. It's a forgiveness, sometimes of other people, but most and first and foremost of their very own self, for ever taking on the falsehoods in the way that they did and held on, thinking that they were being loyal in some way to and right to be loyal to those falsehoods and keeping them in place. it's interesting there you're talking about the whole of our system needing to get rid of that toxicity in the manner in which it does, and emotional toxicity we've similarly got to also let go from us. The whole of unforgiveness, of course, settles mainly in our large intestine, and the large intestine is all about literally letting go, releasing, as we need to do when we go to the bathroom, to the toilet, to literally release unwanted waste. Similarly, we've got to make sure that unforgiveness of ourselves, primarily, and then maybe of others, misinterpretation, most of the time it is allowed to literally leave our system, because it's that does masses of harm to ourselves and to the creative world that we're a part of. But again, it is not being taught. It has not been taught, and it needs to be constantly expressed and shown to humanity, so that we have an entirely different approach to it, that we're equipped, that we resource ourselves more properly than the victim mentality has had opportunity to do for far, far too long. I'm sure there has been times in our human existence where we haven't been as kept so tiny and small as we are in this particular experience in our life, and it's necessary therefore for things to become full circle again, and for that awareness to help us to rise above that station. In that whole field of addiction, Michael, I'm so aware of the fact that there are many different forms of assist given to another, but it all has the same makeup about it. So Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, of course you can go to those self-help groups. Of course they're free to attend. And, a city like Vancouver in Canada, where I live, had 177 meetings happening in 1 week. However, if that is the only, means available to a person, it actually just won't do, because that in and of itself is also of a very, very limited kind, and it brings about a conscious awareness still that has dependency written and judgment written right through it. So of course we have to go bigger than even what appear to be our most precious helps available to us at present. They're not. We owe it to ourselves to go bigger than what society is currently offering to us. There's almost something sinister about it in my own mind, that people are being kept en masse under the guise of being assisted, when in actual fact
What day they say I'm an alcoholic? Every day they say I'm a drug addict, and I'm a recovering drug addict.
I've got to say it does.
And that is that becomes the voice in your head, and that becomes the operating principle, and then your body responds, and your attitude responds, and your impulses respond to that. It may be effective to stop a particular behavior, but it's not necessarily effective to your life. It's not. It's like saying I poop in my pants, and I poop in my pants, and if I don't go to the toilet and pull my pants down, then I will poop in my pants. It's ridiculous. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
No,
I do.
We all pooped in our pants at one point, but then we learned how to do something else, and we don't poop in our pants anymore. But you don't go for the rest of your life and saying, I poop in my pants, unless,
No. But the only thing is, we have to be shown how. We really do. It's like any child has to be shown there is more to the way that you may have so far been introduced to. So it's a wonderful thing to remain childlike, but not childish. There's a big difference. Childlike keeps the wonder, the awe, like any child has about life. It has excitement, it has imagination, it has creativity. They're the beautiful things that an adult must be shown how to maintain. That's the natural joy that I believe is so important to us all. The profound absence of natural joy is when we remain childish, when we become fear-filled. And it is that natural absence of that natural joy, is when addictions inevitably are the only attractions left to us. How do we quell the pain? How do we stop this constant feeling of limitation? How do we actually just, for a moment, interrupt it? But that perpetual remaining in a state of what people might call recovery is totally inadequate at this time in our own age, with so much at our disposal, scientifically, medically, spiritually. We know so much more, or have at our disposal, and it's simply not being shown enough to people so that they can expand, so that they can actually keep their childlike adult behavior and not immediately go into victim mentality, childish, just because someone lords it over them or presents in the more dominant fashion that immediately brings the individual back to a place of tiny, fear-filled, unworthy, needy. No, we're so much more ready for a different experience than those. And it is up to me, it is up to you, and the wonderful work you're doing through your own Facebook page, to be reminders of people to stir that again back into their own reality.
Well, it's not just you and me. I mean, there's just a whole list of people, like for example, John Bradshaw, and he did this incredible work on inner child work, and he brought the idea into the whole of society that as an adult, there's still a piece of us that we would call the wounded inner child, and that needs to be addressed. And Alan Watts, like you said, it talks about, being adult and trying every wild thing that didn't work. And then you keep trying the wildest thing to make sure it doesn't work. And then another 5 years to make sure that, you didn't miss anything. And then you have to awaken. So, there's all these teachers that are all kind of going to the same conclusion.
Yeah, there are great voices in the world. And instead of people maybe en masse thinking that, like you said before, that they are our gurus or they're the ones that we need to just sit back and listen to, it's time for us, each of us individually now, to be able to take full responsibility for that. And whether we think we're well versed in it or equipped or qualified in any way to teach it, we've got to start speaking it with confidence and with whatever competence we feel as though we have, in order for it to become not only our own reality, but one that immediately invites someone else to a different realization about their very own self too. I believe it is the responsibility of us all to do just that, to really be adult, be grown up, be mature, gain in wisdom, unlearn many of the things we've learned, unknow much of the stuff we thought we knew about ourselves, about addiction, about life, and actually instead begin to really be present without judgment and live it, and just live it. It's like you said before, it's simple, but most simple truths remain hidden from us because of their simplicity. We try to make things so logical, so complicated, that of course we miss them. Totally miss
words.
Far too many words. Far too many words, yeah.
Well, you have this great quality. The reason I really reached out to you, I'm really glad we get a chance to talk and do this interview, but you have this compassion, and I know about compassion. Compassion you have to have delved into your own pain, or you have to look right into the face of pain day after day, and when you can look at the face of pain in people day after day, it changes you.
It does.
People connect on the level of pain 1,000 times more than they connect on the level of love, believe it or not. Because
that's so.
The compassion that is required for pain is concentrated love. We don't look at it that way, but when you connect to pain, that brings the whole spectrum of love to focus at one point. And that's what compassion is.
It's a great truth that you're speaking. Compassion, very, very definitely, without question, is what is has been largely missing in our world. Compassion is the ability to validate another person and affirm the other person. Constant affirmation and validation. It's the only thing anybody ever truly needs, to be affirmed and validated, that they're safe, they're okay. Those words are beautiful words. Words that are simply saying, I can understand exactly how you may be feeling. Those words are magic to the ears of the person who has not ever experienced someone accepting them for all that they truly are. And that, therefore, is the beginning of that expansion in their life that I'm speaking about, that has otherwise been kept so very, very small and fear-filled. I do believe it's the responsibility of us all to find whatever ways and means we have of unlocking that prison cell of each of our other members of this humanity. And we start first and foremost, of course, with ourselves. Yeah.
Well, I'm really kind of a fan of yours, and I hope you do more interviews. I hope you do more talks and record them. Get yourself a little camera, and you and your wife have that great message, and fill up the YouTube channel and write more books.
Yeah, it is important to do that. And we know that it is a great way that people right across the world are beginning to receive its message. I don't say my message. I do speak about the message of, my book. My book is a very beautiful book, and it's a very beautiful book, Addiction Unplugged, How to Be Free, because it's a message that even if I open up the pages of it, Michael, I can now still think, wow, that's fabulous, simply because it was a book almost written through me rather than by John Flaherty. And I think when we each of us reach that point, when we're open and literally allow life to flow and communicate fully through us without interruption or without us thinking we know more than perhaps allowing it to do so, that's when we'll always be at our best as human beings. That is a compassion, that is a respect, a mutual and a self-respect, again, that I know the world definitely needs to hear. So
well, there's a fantastic thing that I'm sure you've experienced, and that is whenever there's a person in pain, then life wants to go and rush and take care of that pain, right? That's the way the life of the universe just wants to give the right frequency of life back to that person who's suffering. Now, if you, as any person who's a teacher or healer, can get in between the life force that's coming to heal that person, right? Then that means you get all this power and intuition and knowledge and insight that goes through you into that person. And that's a very fantastic place to be. More people, many people are healers now just because of that, because there's this great healing intent that's coming onto the earth. I mean, we're in the darkest times, and then the strongest light is coming at the darkest time. So
absolutely. Yeah.
So how did you get your books into like 500 languages in every nation in the world? Well, it's like 5 or 6 languages, isn't it?
It is. It's in five languages at present, Michael. And it's interesting the way it has all happened. For lots of years, having worked in this field of addiction and knowing that I was always presenting it so very differently to my colleagues, to my peers. I've got to say, I didn't stay in jobs in addiction rehab centers for very long, for the simple reason, I was never going to fit that mold at all, and it never made me happy to try doing so. So even although I held important jobs and responsibilities, I knew really that I had to let go of that restriction in my own life too. But many of the people who used to literally, and again, I say this not from ego, not from any form of arrogance, but just simply by recognition and from awareness, that when people were literally on the edge of their seat, listening to that free flow message that you're speaking to me about, that you're speaking with me about, that I know that as long as I get John Flaherty out of the way and allow that to come through, is worth hearing. And they used to say to me, John, are you not going to put this in a book? Or, John, what if only I'd learned this when I was at school years ago? I might not have been sitting in the rehab center now. Or if only my mother could hear what I've been doing while I've been in the rehab center. So they actually used to literally urge me to put it into a book form. I procrastinated about that for long enough, thinking, maybe so. But I did take notice of their message and did get writing, and it happened very quickly and very easily. It was a book that came out, Michael, in 2012 as a first edition. And at the time I was living in Canada. It was an American-based edition. It was okay. But I then looked to doing a second edition with just a few tiny little alterations. And literally within the last couple of years, people have very generously said, we would love to have that in Polish. We would love to have that in German. We would love to have it in Spanish. We would love to have it in all these different languages. And they have literally offered to do the translation of it for me. So when a message needs to be heard, life conspires to actually make sure it is. And it's been a wonderful experience as a result. It's also meant that I've been able to come to visit different places, different parts of the world, speak to you now in Miami from my place in York, before ever there was a New York, in York here in England, and been able to share, with you, and then as a result further across the field. The very same message is an awesome thing in and of itself. So how does it happen? It happens because it's meant to happen.
Well, I'm glad you're out there, and actually, I'm glad you're in my group too. I like to post when you post them, and I hope you get your little video camera and do your videos of your wife, because she's got a great message. And I was so impressed. The very first post you posted in our group was about your wife, and I thought, this guy has completely got it right. Tuned in, Mama's happy, everybody's happy.
Well, to be quite honest, and I say this without a word of exaggeration, my wife Anne Louise is a beautiful soul and terrifically wise, with huge amounts to offer. I like to think of myself as being a little like that, but I always had to catch up a little bit with her. Right? She always seems to be, just by necessity for me. It's wonderful. She's always the one that's actually saying, John, come on, bit more expansion. So I look to her with absolute gratitude, and it's a wonderful thing that we've shared this pathway together. So we love to teach together. We love to travel to places together. We'd love to come to Miami. We'd love to wherever, actually anyone would love to receive us, and we'll dearly share whatever it is that we have to share with those who are ready to receive it. Thank you very much today, Michael, for this opportunity.
Yeah, I think we'll end it there. I kind of got done what I wanted to get done, and I really want to thank you for being out there, and you made to break away from the mainstream, break away from religion. Yep. So there's into spirituality, and to break away from mainstream therapy into what is effective and heart-centered. You're a hero, really.
Yeah. Crucial to do that, simply so that I could sit with any other person without any allegiance to any of those things myself, so that it was not a boundary or an obstacle for them, and that's easy enough to do. I haven't really given anything away, but I have received such a lot as a result. So we would advocate it for everyone, actually, to allow that process to happen.
Great teachers are the greatest learners, because they're always being, you want to teach that? How about this? You just keep getting given, given.
Sure, Michael. Lovely.
Okay, John.
Many thanks. I wish you a great year ahead, and
Happy New Year.
I will keep in connection.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bright blessings to you. Bye.